Okay, so Barton is going to be the first house up, and House of Bonhoeffer, you're on deck.
Just 4 months ago, on February 9, 1950, a Republican senator presented a list of 205 men in the State Department known to be members of the Communist Party. These past few months, we've listened anxiously to Senator McCarthy's speeches here on the Senate floor, and we've begun to suspect each other. We live in a time of paranoia and division in which we cannot so much as accept a dinner invitation lest we be seen at the same party as an accused communist. Here, to address you now, is Margaret Chase Smith. She served on the Republican State Committee of Maine from 1930 to 1936, when her husband, Clyde Smith, was elected to the House of Representatives a year later. She followed him to Washington, D.C. to serve as his secretary. In 1940, Clyde fell ill and asked Margaret to run for his seat in the general election for the House, where she served 4 terms as a representative. She is a columnist with a national newspaper, a devoted member of the Republican Party. But most importantly, she is brave. She was the first woman in the history of the United States to serve in both houses of Congress. Lauded by the Associated Press for the past 2 years as the Woman of the Year in politics, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to introduce to you today Senator Margaret Chase Smith.
Mr. President, I would like to speak briefly and simply about a serious national condition. It is a national feeling of fear and frustration that could result in national suicide and the end of everything that we Americans hold dear. It comes from the lack of effective leadership in either the legislative branch or the executive branch of our government. That leadership is so lacking that serious and responsible proposals are being made, that national advisory commissions be appointed to provide such critically needed leadership. I speak as briefly as possible because the issue is too great to be obscured by eloquence. I speak simply and briefly in the hope that my words will be taken to heart. I speak as a Republican. I speak as a woman. I speak as a United States Senator. I speak as an American. The United States Senate has long enjoyed worldwide respect as the greatest deliberative body in the world. But recently, that deliberative character has been debased to the level of a forum of hate and character assassination, sheltered by the shield of the congressional immunity. It is strange that we can verbally attack others without restraint and with full protection, and yet we hold ourselves above the same type of criticism here on the Senate floor. Surely the United States Senate is big enough to take self-criticism and self-appraisal. Surely we should be able to take the same kind of character attacks that we ourselves dish out to outsiders. I think that it is high time for the United States Senate and its members to do some soul searching, for us to weigh our consciences on the manner in which we are performing our duty to the people of America, on the manner in which we are using or abusing our individual powers and privileges. I think that it is high time that we remembered that we have sworn to uphold and to defend the Constitution. I think that it is high time that we remembered that the Constitution, as amended, speaks not only of the freedom of speech, but also of the right to trial by jury, rather than trial by accusation. Whether it be a criminal prosecution in court or a character accusation in the Senate, there is little practical dimension for the life of a person to be ruined. Those of us who shout the loudest about Americanism in making prosecutions are all too frequently those who, by our own words and actions, ignore some of the basic principles of Americanism. The right to criticize, the right to hold unpopular beliefs, the right to protest, the right of independent thought. The exercise of these rights should not cost one single American citizen his reputation or his right to a livelihood, nor should he be in danger of losing his reputation or livelihood merely because he happens to know someone who holds unpopular beliefs. Who of us doesn't? Otherwise, none of us could call our souls our own. Otherwise, none of us would have thought control because it would have had set in. The American people are sick and tired of being afraid to speak their minds lest they be politically smeared as communists or fascist by their opponents. Freedom of speech is not what it used to be in America. It has been so abused by some that it is no longer exercised by others. As a Republican, I say to my colleagues on this side of the aisle that the Republican Party faces a challenge today that is not unlike the challenge that it faced back in Lincoln's day. The Republican Party so successfully met that challenge that it emerged from the Civil War as the champion of a united nation, as well as a party that unrelentingly fought loose spending and loose programs. Today, our country is being psychologically divided by the confusion and the suspicions bred in the United States Senate to spread like cancerous tentacles of know-nothing, suspect everything attitudes. Today we have a Democratic administration that has developed a mania for loose spending as well as loose programs. History is repeating itself. And the Republican Party again has the opportunity to emerge as the champion of unity and prudence. The Democratic administration has greatly lost the confidence of the American people by its complacency to the threat of communism here at home and the leak of vital secrets to Russia through key officials of the very same Democratic administration. There are enough proved cases to make this point without diluting our criticism with unproved charges. Surely there are sufficient reasons to make it clear to the American people that it is time for a change, and that a Republican victory is necessary to the security of this country. Surely it is clear that this nation will continue to suffer as long as it is governed by the present ineffective Democratic administration. Yet to displace it with a Republican regime embracing a philosophy that lacks political integrity or intellectual honesty would prove equally disastrous to this nation. The nation sorely needs a Republican victory. But I don't want to see the Republican Party ride to political victory on the four horsemen of calumny: fear, ignorance, bigotry, and smear. I doubt if the Republican Party could, simply because I don't believe the American people will uphold any political party that puts political exploitation above national interest. Surely we Republicans are not that desperate for victory. I don't want to see the Republican Party win that way. While it might be a fleeting victory for the Republican Party, it would be a more lasting defeat for the American people. Surely it would ultimately be suicide for the Republican Party and the two-party system, the very same one that has protected our American liberties from the dictatorship of a one-party system. As members of the minority party, we do not have the primary authority to formulate the policy of our government, but we do have the responsibility of rendering constructive criticism, of clarifying issues, and of allaying fears by acting as responsible citizens. As a woman, I wonder how the mothers, the wives, the sisters, and the daughters of these men feel about the way in which members of their families have been politically mangled in the Senate debate. And I use the word debate advisedly. As a United States Senator, I am not proud of the way in which the Senate has been made a publicity platform for irresponsible sensationalism. I am not proud of the reckless abandon in which unproved charges have been hurled from the side of the aisle. I am not proud of the obviously staged, undignified accusations that have been attempted in retaliation from the other side of the aisle. I don't like the way the Senate has become a rendezvous for vilification, for selfish political gain at the sacrifice of individual reputations and national unity. I am not proud of the way we smear outsiders from the floor of the Senate and hide behind the cloak of congressional immunity and still place ourselves beyond criticism on the floor of the Senate. As an American, I am shocked at the way Republicans and Democrats alike are playing directly into the communist design of confuse, divide, and conquer. As an American, I don't want a Democratic administration whitewash or cover up, any more than I want a Republican smear or witch hunt. As an American, I condemn a Republican fascist, just as much as I condemn a Democratic communist. I condemn a Democratic fascist, just as much as I condemn a Republican communist. They are equally dangerous to you, to me, and to our country. As an American, I want to see our nation recapture the strength, and I want to see our nation recapture the unity that it once had when we fought the enemy instead of ourselves. It is with these thoughts that I have drafted what I call a declaration of conscience. I am gratified that Senator Toby, Senator Aiken, Senator Morse, Senator Ives, Senator Thye, and Senator Hendrickson have concurred in that declaration and have authorized me to announce their concurrence. Thank you.
Madame, Messieurs, citoyens, je suis ravi de présenter. Oh, excusez-moi. I called this meeting of the Committee of Public Safety to order. On this, the 17th day of the month of Pluvios, 1794. We have a lot of matters to discuss on the docket today. Of late, the greatest threats to the people of this republic have not been from the usual sources. The king and all those who served him are dead. The British, American, and Prussian dogs seem satisfied that our creed of liberty, equality, fraternity will not reach the ears of the oppressed masses. No, the greatest threats are not from abroad, citoyen, but here, in our republic, in our great France. Being entrusted with the public safety, we are not resistant to act when there have been threats to our equality, brought so dearly with blood. This is to the credit of you, messieurs, and to this great committee. The recent post of the Committee of General Defense, however, has raised some concerns. These men, it says, fought and bled alongside us for our glorious revolution for the sake of our liberty and our equality. How then can we justify condemning them as enemies of the people? Vigilance. Vigilance, diligence, and constant suspicion are required to maintain this great republic. The men of this Committee of General Defense forgot this and became apathetic, corrupt, and selfish. Such men are a threat to our peace, to our security, to our liberty. They must be punished. On this point, our also eminent member, Citoyen Robespierre, has prepared a report which will be distributed amongst the populace on the importance of this strict diligence to the preservation of our republic. Citoyen Robespierre.
to found and consolidate democracy, to achieve the peaceable reign of the constitutional laws. We must end the war of liberty against tyranny and pass safely across the storms of the revolution. Such is the aim of the revolutionary system that you have enacted. Your conduct, then, ought also to be regulated by the stormy conditions in which the Republic is placed. And the plan of your administration must result from the spirit of the revolutionary government combined with the general principles of democracy. Now, what is the fundamental principle of the democratic and popular government? That is, the essential spring which makes it move. It is virtue. I am speaking of the public virtue which effected so many prodigies in Greece and Rome, and which ought to produce many more surprising ones in a republic in France. Of that virtue which is nothing other than the love of country and of its laws. But as the essence of the republic or of democracy is equality, it follows that the love of country necessarily includes the love of equality. It is also true that this sublime sentiment assumes a preference for the public interest over every particular interest. Hence, the love of country presupposes or produces all the virtues. For what are they, other than that spiritual strength which renders one capable of those sacrifices? And how can the slave of avarice or ambition sacrifice his idol to his country? Not only is virtue the soul of democracy, it can exist only in that government. A publican virtue can be considered in relation to the people and in relation to the government. It is necessary in both. When only the government lacks virtue, when only the government lacks virtue, there remains a resource of virtue in the people. When the people itself is corrupted, liberty is already lost. Fortunately, virtue is natural to the people, notwithstanding aristocratic prejudices. A nation is truly corrupted when, having by decrees lost its character and its liberty, it passes from democracy to aristocracy or to monarchy. That is the decrepitude and death of the body politic. But when, by prodigious efforts of courage and reason, a people breaks the chains of despotism to make them into trophies of liberty, when by the force of its moral temperament, it comes, as it were, out of the arms of the death to recapture all the vigor of youth, when by turns it is sensitive and proud, intrepid and docile, and cannot be stopped, neither by impregnable ramparts, nor by the innumerable armies of the tyrants armed against it, but stops of itself upon confronting the law's image. Then if it does not climb to the summit of its destinies, this can only be the fault of those who govern it. From all this, let us deduce a great truth. The characteristic of popular government is confidence in the people and severity towards itself. The whole development of our theory would end here if you had only to guide the vessel of the republic through calm waters, but the tempest roars, and the revolution imposes on you another task. The straight purity of the French Revolution's basis, the very sublimity of its objective, is precisely what causes both our strength and our weakness. Our strength because it gives to us truth's ascendancy over imposture, and the rights of the people over the private interests. Our weaknesses, because it rallies all vicious men against us, all those who in their hearts contemplated despoiling the people, and all those who intend to let it be despoiled. Both those who have rejected freedom as a personal calamity, and those who have embraced the revolution as a career, and the republic as prey. Hence, the defection of so many ambitious or greedy men who since the point of departure have abandoned us along the way because they did not begin the journey with the same destination in view. the two opposing spirits that have been represented in a struggle to rule over nature, might be said to be fighting in this great period of human history to fix irrevocably the destinies of the world. And France is the scene of this fearful combat. Without, all the tyrants encircle you. Within, all the friends of tyranny conspire. They will conspire until hope is wrested from crime. We must smother the internal and external enemies of the Republic or perish with it. Now, in this situation, the first maxim of your policy ought to be to lead the people by reason and the people's enemies by terror. If the spring of popular government in time of peace is virtue, the spring of popular government in a revolution is at once virtue and terror. Virtue without which terror is fatal, terror without which virtue is powerless. Terror is nothing other than justice, prompt, severe, inflexible. It is therefore an emanation of virtue. It is not so much a special principle as it is a consequence of the general principle of democracy applied to our country's most urgent needs. It has been said that terror is the principle of despotic government. Does your government therefore resemble terror? Yes. As the sword that gleams as the sword that gleams in the hands of the heroes of liberty resembles that with which the henchmen of tyranny are armed. Let the despot govern by terror his brutalized subjects. He is right as a tyrant. Subdue by terror the enemies of liberty, and you will be right as founders of the Republic. For the government of the revolution is liberty's despotism against tyranny. Is force made only to protect crime, and is the thunderbolt not destined to strike the heads of the proud? Indulgence for the royalists, cry certain men. Mercy for the villains. No! Mercy for the innocent. Mercy for the weak. Mercy for the unfortunate. Mercy for humanity. Society owes protection only to peaceable citizens. The only citizens in the Republic are the Republicans. For it, the royalists, the conspirators are only strangers, or rather, enemies. This terrible war waged by liberty against tyranny, is it not indivisible? Are the enemies within not the allies of the enemies without? The assassins who tear our country apart, the intriguers who buy the consciences that hold the people's mandates, the traitors who sell them, to stir the mercenary pamphleteers hired to dishonor the people's cause, to kill public virtue, to stir the fire of civil discord, and to prepare political counter-revolution by moral counter-revolution. Are all those men less guilty or less dangerous than the tyrants they serve?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the East Room of the White House. This evening marks the 7th lecture in the Millennium Series. Over the last year, the President and Mrs. Clinton have invited scholars, artists, and scientists to speak, to bring recognition to our history, our creativity, our ingenuity, to help us to honor the past and imagine the future. Tonight, we will examine the darker side of the 20th century as Professor Elie Wiesel discusses the perils of indifference, lessons learned from a violent century. Taken as a teenager by Nazi forces, Mr. Wiesel was deported to Auschwitz with his family. While there, he and his father were selected for slave labor. Life at the camp was brutal. Rations were scarce, and discipline was severe. At one point, Elie was whipped 25 times for a minor infraction. As the Russian armies advanced in the spring of 1945, the Nazi forces forced Wiesel and his family to march to a new location where his father, mother, and sister died. Just 4 months later, Elie was liberated by American troops. After having lost everything, he found himself in New York City, where he was determined to start anew. Though Mr. Weissel has experienced the consequences of indifference firsthand, he will also be able to help us see how to find a way to a better, more peaceful future. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Elie Wiesel. Thank you.
Mr. President, Mrs. Clinton, members of Congress, Ambassador Holbrooke, Excellencies, friends. 54 years ago to the day, a young Jewish boy from the Carpathian Mountains woke up not far from Goethe's beloved Weimar, in a place of eternal infamy known as Buchenwald. He was finally free, but there was no joy in his heart. He thought there never would be again. Liberated a day earlier by American soldiers, he will always remember their rage at what they saw. And even if he lives to be a very old man, he will remember their rage and be grateful to them for their compassion. Though he did not understand their language, their eyes told him what he needed to know, that they too would remember and bear witness. And now I stand before you, Mr. President, Commander-in-Chief of the army that freed me and tens of thousands of others. And I am filled with profound and abiding gratitude to the American people. We stand on the threshold of a new century, a new millennium. What will the legacy of the vanishing century be? Surely it will be judged, and judged harshly, in both moral and metaphysical terms. These failures have cast a dark shadow on humanity. So much violence, so much indifference. What is indifference? Etymologically, this word means no difference, a strange and unnatural state where the lines blurs between light and darkness, dusk and dawn, crime and punishment, cruelty and compassion, good and evil. Can one view indifference as a virtue? Is it necessary at times to practice it simply to keep one's sanity, live normally, to enjoy a fine meal and a glass of wine, while the world around us endures harrowing upheavals? Of course, indifference can be tempting, and more than that, it can be seductive. It is much easier to look away from victims. It is, after all, awkward, troublesome to be involved in another person's pain and despair. Yet for the one who is indifferent, his or her neighbor is of no consequence. Their lives are meaningless. Indifference reduces the other to an abstraction. Over there, beyond the black gates of Auschwitz, the most tragic of all prisoners were known as Muselmänner. Wrapped in their torn blankets, they would sit or lie on the ground and stare vacantly into space, unaware of who or where they were. They no longer felt pain, hunger, thirst. They feared nothing. They felt nothing. They were dead and did not know it. Rooted in our tradition, we felt that to be abandoned by God was worse than to be punished by him. Better an unjust God than an indifferent one. For us to be ignored by God was a far harsher punishment than to be a victim of his anger. Man can live far from God, not outside God. God is everywhere we are, even in suffering. In a way, to be indifferent to this suffering is what makes the human being inhuman. Indifference, after all, is more dangerous than anger or hatred. Anger can be creative. One writes a great poem, a great symphony. One does something special for the sake of humanity because one is angry at what one witnesses, at the injustices one witnesses. Indifference is never creative. Even hatred elicits a response. You fight it. You denounce it. You disarm it. Indifference elicits no response. Indifference is not a response. Indifference is not a beginning, it is an end, and therefore indifference is always the friend of the enemy. For it benefits the aggressor, never his victim, whose pain is multiplied when he or she feels forgotten. The political prisoner in his cell, the hungry children, the homeless refugees, not to answer their plight, not to relieve their solitude by offering them a spark of hope, is to exile them from human memory. To deny their humanity is to betray our own. Indifference, then, is not only a sin, it is a punishment. This is one of the great lessons of the vanishing century. Our only miserable consolation was that we thought that Treblinka and Auschwitz were closely guarded secrets, that the leaders of the free world not know what was beyond the black gates and the barbed wire, that they had no knowledge of the war that Hitler and his armies and his accomplices waged against the Jews in the war against the Allies. If they knew, we thought, then they would move heaven and earth to intervene. They would have spoken out with outrage and conviction. They would have bombed the railways on the way to Birkenau. Just the railways, just once. And now we knew. We learned. We discovered that the Pentagon knew. The State Department knew. And the illustrious occupant of the White House, who was a great leader, and I say it with some pain and anguish because Franklin Delano Roosevelt died 54 years ago today. No doubt he was a great leader. He mobilized the American people and the world going into battle, bringing hundreds and thousands of valiant and brave soldiers to fight fascism, to fight dictatorship, to fight Hitler. Nevertheless, in Jewish history, his memory, I must say it, his memory in Jewish history is flawed. I don't understand. Roosevelt was a good man with a heart. What happened? Why this indifference at the highest level to the suffering of the victims? But then there were human beings who were sensitive to our tragedy, those non-Jews, those Christians, the ones we called righteous Gentiles, whose heroic acts saved the honor of their faith. Why were they so few? Why was there a greater effort to save SS murderers after the war than to save their victims during the war? And yet, my friends, good things came out of that traumatic century. The defeat of Nazism, the collapse of communism, the rebirth of Israel on its ancestral soil, the peace treaty between Egypt and Israel, the demise of apartheid, the peace accord in Ireland. And let us remember, Mr. President, that meeting between Arafat and Rabin that you convened here. I will never forget that. Does it mean that we have learned from the past? Are we less insensitive to the plight of victims of ethnic cleansing and other forms of injustices? near and far. What about the children? We see them on the news. We see them in the papers. Their fate is always the most tragic, inevitably. When adults wage war, children perish. Every minute, one of them dies from hunger, disease, famine. Many of them could be saved. And so once again, I think of the young Jewish boy from the Carpathian Mountains. He has accompanied the old man I have become over the years of quest and struggle. And we go forward together into the new millennium with a profound fear and abounding hope. Thank you.
The year is 1865, the day, March 4th. Just a little over a month prior, our fabled hero, Abraham Lincoln, had managed to see the 13th Amendment passed by both the House of Representatives and the Senate. He joins us this day, the day when he accepts the yoke of presidency for the second time, to declare mercy on the South and call for the United States of America to truly unite again. It is a mercy that seems uncalled for, a mercy that no one this day expects, but a mercy that is necessary for a nation divided to heal, a mercy that is providential. You see, this day, the rain is pouring down on the District of Columbia. The 40,000 that have turned out not only face the mayhem of each other, but that of nature. However, they are all here for President Lincoln, and as one of the president's mounted bodyguards later said, they seem to hang on to his words as though they were meat and drink. And when he concluded the last paragraph, beginning, "with malice toward none, with charity for all," which fell like a benediction from heaven, the shout of the people seemed to rise up to the very sky. But those shouts aren't just that of white people, no. Those shouts came from the mouths of free people, both black and white alike. This day is a day of hope. Reporters who were present commented on the difference in attitude between the two inauguration days. From the sulky, dry day with the threat of war looming over them 4 years prior, to the enthused and charged attitude of those at present. The tumultuous war that we've been fighting is coming to a close. Victory is in our sight. It seems that God has heard our captain's cries and prayers and responded. The electricity of ardor passing through the crowd this day seemed to be reflected by Providence because, as reporter Noah Brooks remarked, just as Lincoln stepped forward to take the oath of office, the sun, which had been obscured by rain clouds, burst forth in great splendor on Lincoln.
Fellow countrymen, at this second appearing to take the oath of the presidential office, there is less occasion for an extended address than there was at the first. Then, a statement somewhat in detail of a course to be pursued seemed fitting and proper. Now, after the expiration of 4 years, which during the public deck declared that they be constantly pursue explanations for what was occurring. The progress of our arms, upon which all else chiefly depends, is as well known to the people as it is to myself. And it is, I trust, reasonably satisfactory and encouraging to all. With high hope for the future, no prediction in regard to it is ventured. On the occasion corresponding to this 4 years ago, all thoughts were anxiously directed towards an impending civil war. All dreaded it. All sought to avert it. While the inaugural address was being delivered in this place, devoted altogether to saving the Union without war. Insurgent agents were in the city, seeking to destroy it without war, to dissolve the Union and divide effects by negotiation. Both parties deprecated war, but one of them would make war rather than let the nation survive, while the other would accept war rather than let it perish. And the war came. 1/8 of the whole population were colored slaves, distributed not generally over the Union, but localized in the southern part of it. These slaves represented a peculiar and powerful interest. All knew that this interest was somehow the cause of the war. To strengthen, perpetuate, and extend these interests was the object for which the insurgents would rend the Union, even by war, while the government claimed no right to do more than to restrict the territorial enlargement of it. Neither anticipated for the war the magnitude or the duration which it has already attained. Each looked for an easier triumph, a result less fundamental and astounding. Neither anticipated that the cause of the conflict might cease, with or even before the conflict itself should cease. Both read the same Bible and prayed to the same God, and each invoked his aid against the other. It may seem strange that any man dare ask a just God's assistance in wringing their bread from the sweat of other men's brows. But let us judge not, that we be not judged. The prayers of both could not be answered. That of neither has been answered fully. The Almighty has his own purposes. Woe unto the world because of offenses. For it must needs be that offenses come. But woe to the man by whom the offense cometh. If we shall suppose that American slavery is such an offense which, having needs come in the providence of God, yet which he now wishes to eradicate from us, but he gives to both the North and the South this terrible war as the woe due to him by which the offense came. Shall we discern therein any departure from divine attributes, which believers in an almighty God always ascribe to him? Fondly do we hope, fervently do we pray that this mighty scourge of war might speedily pass away. Yet, if God wills that it continue, until all the wealth piled by the bondsman's 250 years of unrequited toil shall be sunk, and until every drop of blood drawn with the lash shall be repaid by another drawn with the sword, as was said 3,000 years ago. so still must it be said. The judgments of the Lord are pure and righteous altogether. With malice toward none, charity toward all. With firmness in the right, as God gives us to see the right, let us strive to finish the work we are in, to bind up our nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan. To do all which may achieve and cherish a last and just peace among us and all nations. Thank you.
This past week, I traveled to Worcester to hear the Queen of the Platform speak at the National Convention of Women's Rights. When I heard Miss Ernestine Rose championing the cause of women's rights in her uniquely powerful yet graceful style of eloquence, I was won over, and I had to have her speak at our People's Sunday meeting here in Boston. Mrs. Ernestine Rose found her voice when she was only 16. Born and raised in Russian Poland, her rabbi father had betrothed her to a young friend of his, and custom dictated she had little choice but to obey. However, she didn't want to marry a man she neither chose nor loved, so she set out to civil court, where her voice convinced the judge not only to free her from the betrothal, but allow her to keep her mother's inheritance in full. Shortly thereafter, she left Poland for Prussia. Prussia required all non-native Jewish citizens to have a Prussian sponsor. Miss Rose appealed, not in a lowly civil court this time, but to the king himself. A woman, a Jewish woman, approaching a king. I would not have dared, but she not only dared, she once again was favored and granted exemption from the sponsorship law. After traveling extensively in Europe, she settled for a time in England, where her voice was refined through association with the utopian socialist Robert Owen. He was so impressed by her that he invited her to speak in a large hall. In spite of her limited knowledge of English, the audience was so captivated that from then on, her appearances were regular. After emigrating to the United States in 1836, her vigor in defending her own rights grew into a vigorous defense of the rights of all people, regardless of sex, race, or religion. In this year of 1851, we have borne witness to women such as Sojourner Truth and Susan B. Anthony pursuing the platform to give voice to the women whose individual rights are not realized in our country. Mrs. Rose has been tireless in her fight for women's equality. Her passion is far from fading, and her convictions have only grown deeper and more articulate. Legislators quail in her presence. Slaveholders have nearly tarred and feathered her, but thousands flock to hear her speak. And those who come to scoff remain to cheer and applaud. Even her enemies cannot deny her rare gift of eloquence and her charm. I am humbled to introduce the Queen of the Platform, Mrs. Ernestine Rose.
Friends, the observing and reflecting mind that casts his vision far beyond the panoramic scenes of everyday life must perceive that our present age is fast ripening for the most important changes in the history of mankind. The desire for freedom has shaken Europe to its center. The love of liberty has convulsed the nations like the mighty throes of an earthquake. The oppressed are struggling against the oppressors. Kings and priests are called upon to give an account of their stewardship, for man no longer believes in the divine right of force and fraud. Yet, great as these signs of the times are, they are not new. From the time of absolute despotism to the present hour of comparative freedom, the weak have ever to struggle against the strong, right against might. But a new sign has appeared in our social zodiac, prophetic of the most important changes, pregnant with the most beneficial results that have ever taken place in the annals of human history. Woman is rising in the full dignity of her being to claim the recognition of her rights. And why? I ask, in the name of reason and justice, why should she not have the same rights as man? Like him, she came inexhaustibly into existence. Like him, she possesses the physical, mental, and moral powers on proper contemplation of which depends her happiness. Like him, she is subject to all the vicissitudes of life. Like him, she has to pay the penalty for breaking nature's laws. Like him, she suffers and enjoys with her country. Yet, she is not recognized as his equal. In the laws of the land, she has no rights. In government, she has no voice. From the cradle to the grave, she is subject to the control of man. Father, guardian, and husband. One conveys her like some piece of merchandise over to the other. At marriage, she loses her entire identity. Her being is said to be merged in her husband. Has nature there merged it? Has she ceased to exist or to feel pleasure and pain? When she violates the laws of her being, does he pay the penalty? When she breaks the laws of the land, does he suffer the punishment? When his wants are supplied, is it sufficient to satisfy the wants of her nature? But it will be said, the husband provides for the wife. Or in other words, he is bound to feed, clothe, and shelter her. Oh, the degradation of that idea. Yes, he keeps her, so he does his horse. By law, both are considered his property. And to a still extent law of England, both may be led by the halter to the marketplace and sold. This is humiliating indeed, but nevertheless true. And the sooner these things are known and understood, the better for humanity. It is no fancy sketch. I know some endeavor to throw the mantle of romance over the subject and to treat woman like some ideal existence not subject to the ills of life. Let those deal in fancy that have nothing better to deal in. For we have to do with sober, sad realities, with stubborn facts. We call upon the nation to remove the legal shackles from woman, set her politically and civilly free, and it will have a more beneficial effect on the still greater tyrant she has to contend with, public opinion. Carry out the Republican principle of universal suffrage, or strike it from your banner, and substitute freedom and power to one half of society, and submission and slavery to the other. Give women, then, the elective franchise. Let married women have the same right to property that the man has. Open to her all the avenues for emulation, distinction, and greatness. Give to her an object for which she can cultivate her powers, and a fair chance to do so. And there will be no need to speculate as to her proper sphere. She will find her own sphere in accordance with her capacities, her powers, and her tastes. Man forgets, or he never knew, that our duties spring from our rights. And he who enjoys the most rights owes in return the most duties. Though until now, while man has enjoyed the rights, he preaches all the duties to woman. No, there is no reason for it, but there are deep-rooted, hoary-headed prejudices against her. The main cause of them is that pernicious falsehood propagated against her being, that she is inferior by her nature. What has a man ever done that woman under the same advantages could not be made to do? In morals, bad as she is generally considered his superior. In intellect, give her a fair chance before you pronounce a verdict against her. Even now, where her mind has been called out at all, her intellect is as powerful, as capacious, as bright as his. Will you tell me we have no Newtons, Shakespeares, and Byrons? Greater natural powers than even these possessed have been destroyed in woman for want of proper culture. Wherein, then, is man so much her superior as to forever remain her master? In physical strength? Then allow me to tell you that the ox and the elephant are his superior. But even on this matter, why is she the feeble, sickly, suffering being we behold her? Oh, the crying injustice towards woman. She is crushed at every step she takes and then insulted for being what the most pernicious education and corrupt public sentimental has made her. But there is no confidence in her powers nor her principles. It has been said, the voice of the people is the voice of God. If that voice is on the side of justice and humanity, then it is true. If the principle of God means the term of truth and of right. But if the public voice is oppressive and unjust, then it ought to be spurned like the voice of falsehood and corruption. And woman, instead of implicitly and blindly following the dictates of public opinion, must investigate for herself what is right or wrong. Act in accordance with her best convictions, and let the rest take care of itself. And woman must cast it off as her greatest enemy, and the time, I trust, will come when she will aid man to remove the political, civil, and religious evils that have swept over the earth like some malignant scourge to lay waste and destroy so much of the beauty, harmony, and happiness of man. And of the old fable of the fall of man through a woman will be superseded by the glorious fact that she was instrumental in the elevation of a race towards a higher, nobler, and happier destiny.
Leopold and Beau both lost
guilty to Bobby's murder, and later confessed to the police that they were prompted to commit such an act of violence by their pure love of excitement. It was for love of the thrill, the experience, the satisfaction and the ego of putting something over, the challenge of committing the perfect crime. Your Honors, these men and the unnecessary, arbitrary killing of Bobby Franks are the reason we are gathered here today. 4 years removed from World War I, a human tragedy that took the lives of some 16 million. Clarence Darrow will rise up and offer a case against capital punishment. In the wake of a war that painted the world red, he will contend that the charges against these men do not demand the barbarism and the finality of the death penalty. Arguing for the lives of these two boys and the soul of our civilization, here is one of the most eloquent orators of the 20th century. He is one of the most profound progressive thinkers in our history, and the greatest trial lawyer who has ever lived. Clarence Darrow's closing remarks.
Now, Your Honor, I've spoken about the war. I believed in it. I don't know if I was crazy or not. Right or wrong, justifiable or unjustifiable, it has changed the world. For 4 long years, the civilized world has been engaged in killing men, Christian against Christian. Barbarians uniting with Christians to kill other Christians, anything to kill. It was taught in every school, even in the Sunday schools. The children played at war. Do you suppose that this world has ever been the same since? How long, Your Honors, will it take before the world gets back the humane emotions that were slowly growing before the war? How long will it take the callous hearts of men before the scars of hatred and cruelty shall be removed? We read about killing 100,000 men in a day. We read about it and we rejoiced in it. We fed on flesh and drank blood. I need not tell you how many upright, honorable young men have come to this court being charged with murder, some saved and some sent to their death. Boys who fought in this war and learned to place a cheap value on human life. The tales of death were at their homes. They were at their playgrounds, in their schools. They were in the newspapers that they read. It was all a part of the common frenzy. What was a life? It was nothing. No one needs to tell me that a crime has a cause. It has a cause as definite as any other disease. And this war has influenced these boys so that life would not be the same to them as it would have been if the world had not been made red with blood. All of us have a share in it. If the state could take it lightly, then why not these boys? There have been many causes and many reasons for this crime. War has been a part of it. Education is a part of it. Birth is a part of it. Money is a part of it. All these things conspired to compass the destruction of these young boys. And if the welfare of the community be benefited by taking their lives, well and good. But I think it would be a great evil that no man could measure. I don't know how much salvage there is in these two boys. I hate to say it in their presence. But what is there to look forward to? Except that you, your honors, would have mercy on them. To spend the balance of their days in prison is mighty little to look forward to. But they may have hope that as the years roll around, they might be released. But now these boys are not fit to be at large. I will not say to the court that I do not hope that at some time in life, when life and age has changed their bodies as it does, and has changed their emotions as it does, that they will once more be able to return to life. But what do they look forward to? I think of Hausman, who wrote this. Now hollow fires burn out to black, and lights are fluttering low. Square your shoulders, lift your pack, and leave your friends and go. Never fear, lads, naught's to dread. Look not left nor right. In all the endless road you dread, there is nothing but the night. I care not, your honor, whether the march begins at the gallows or whether the gates of Joliet close upon them. There is nothing but the night. And that is too little for any man to expect. Will it do society any good? Will your lives be made safer? Will any human being's lives be made safer if it should be handed down from generation to generation that these boys died upon the scaffold? Have they any rights? Is there any reason, Your Honor, why their proud names and their families and all the generations that will bear their names shall have this sinister bar written across them? It is bad enough as it is, but it is not yet death at the scaffold. God knows it's not that. Your Honor, in addition to all I have said, I ask that you would save two honorable families from a disgrace that never ends. This has been a tragedy. A tragedy that no one foresaw. I can't remember the line. No one knows the minds of society. No one knows. No one knows the minds of society. Courts do not. Juries do not. We have placed our fate at the hands of a trained court, thinking that he would be more mindful and considerate than a jury. I cannot tell how people think. The easy thing to do and the popular thing to do is to hang my clients. I know it. The cruel and the thoughtless will approve. And it will be easy today. But more and more, fathers and mothers, the humane,
the kind and the hopeful. Those who are gaining an understanding and are asking questions, not only about these boys, but about their own. These will join in no acclaim at the death of my clients. These are ones who would ask that the shedding of blood be stopped and that the natural feelings of human beings resume their sway. I know the future is on my side, and I stand here, not merely for the lives of these young men, but for all boys, and for all girls, and for all young, and as far as possible for all the old. I am pleading for life. I am pleading for an understanding, for charity and kindness, and an infinite mercy that considers all. I am pleading that we overcome cruelty with kindness and hatred with love. I know the future's on my side. Your Honor, you stand between the past and the future. You may hang these boys. You may hang them by their neck until they are dead. But in doing so, you will turn your face toward the past. In doing so, you will make it difficult for every young boy who in ignorance and darkness must grope his way through the maze that only childhood knows. In doing so, you will harm every unborn child. But you may save them and make it easier for every child that sometime may stand here like these boys stand here today. You can make it easier for every person with an aspiration and a vision and a hope and a fate. I am pleading for the future. I am pleading for a time when cruelty and hatred are no longer controlling the hearts of men. I am pleading for a time where we may learn from reason and judgment and understanding and faith that all life is worth saving and that mercy is the highest attribute of a man. Thank you, Your Honor.
Good morning, Mr. President, Mrs. Clinton, Vice President and Mrs. Gore, and distinguished ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure to welcome each of you and thank you for participating in the 42nd Annual National Prayer Breakfast here in Washington, D.C., February 1994. The name International Prayer Breakfast would probably be a more fitting title for our gathering, since we have as guests not only representatives from all 50 states, but from 150 nations. This morning's event is being translated into 6 languages because of the vast diversity of our honorable audience. Now, if you all please stand and join me in prayer. Our God, God of the Christian and the Jew, God of the Muslim and the Hindu, God of the Buddhists and of those with no church, God of the Republican and the Democrat, God bless America. Help us listen to words that unite, not words that divide. For in the beginning is the Word, and the words we live by do become flesh. So God of all nations, help us. Help us realize that here in this world, your work must truly be our own. May the words we hear today, especially the words of Mother Teresa, enter our hearts and help us crown thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea. Amen. Please be seated. It is my pleasure now to introduce to you Mother Teresa, recipient of the 1979 Nobel Peace Prize, and a woman universally acknowledged as one who loves God and serves him among the poor and the oppressed. She is a woman respected, admired, and loved. Throughout the world, her name has become synonymous with selfless service, unconditional love, and pure goodness. Once asked how she sees herself, Mother Teresa answered, "I pray I can be a pencil in the hand of God." And that she is. we are honored with her presence today. Given our current political climate, in which there is much debate surrounding the question of how we should best care for our nation's families, Mother Teresa will speak to us on the topic of which she is most passionate about, and that is how we can love the weakest members of our societies around the globe. We look forward to hearing whatever encouragement you have in store for us. Ladies and gentlemen, Mother Teresa.
On the last day, Jesus will say to those at his right hand, "Come, enter the kingdom. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was tired, and I was sick, and you visited me." Then Jesus will turn to those on his left and say, "Depart from me. For when I was hungry, you did not give me food. When I was thirsty, you gave me nothing to drink. And when I was sick, you did not visit me." These will ask him, "When did we see you hungry, or thirsty, or sick, and did not come to your help?" And Jesus will answer them, "Whatever you neglected to do to the least of these, you have neglected to do unto me." I think it will be beautiful if we begin with a prayer that expresses what Jesus wants us to do for the least. We are reminded that Jesus came to bring the good news to the poor. He had told us what the good news is when he said, "My peace I leave with you, my peace I give unto you." He came not to give the peace of the world that simply says that we do not bother one another. He came to give the peace of the heart, which comes from loving, from doing good to others. And God loved the world so much that he gave his son. God gave his son to the Virgin Mary. And what did she do with him? As soon as Jesus came into Mary's life, she immediately went in haste to Elizabeth to give her the good news. And as if that were not enough, God the Son should become one of us and bring peace and joy while still in the womb. Jesus also died on the cross to show that greater love. He died for you and for me, for the leper, for the naked person lying in the street. Jesus gave his life to us. And he tells us that we also have to give whatever it takes to do good to one another. And in the gospel, Jesus says very clearly, "Love as I have loved." Jesus died on the cross because that is what it took for him to do good for us, to save us from our selfishness and sin. He gave up everything to do the Father's will, to show us that we must give everything to do God's will, to love one another as he loves each of us. If we are not willing to give whatever it takes to do good to others, sin is still in us. That is why we must give to each other until it hurts. It hurt Jesus to love us. We have been created in his image for greater things. We have been created to love and to be loved. Jesus makes himself the hungry one, the naked one, the homeless one, the unwanted one. And he says, "You did this to me." I feel that the greatest destroyer of peace in today's world is abortion, because it is a war against the child, the direct killing of an innocent child. If we accept that a mother can kill even her own child, how can we tell people not to kill
each other. How do we persuade a woman not to have an abortion? As always, we must persuade her with love. We must remind ourselves that love means to be willing to give until it hurts. So the mother who is thinking of abortion should be helped to love. That is, to give until it hurts her plans, to respect the life of that child. The father of that child, whoever he is, must also give until it hurts. By abortion, the mother does not learn to love, but kills even her own child to solve her own problems. And by abortion, the father is told that he does not have to take any responsibility at all for the child he has brought into the world. The father is likely to put other women in the same trouble. So abortion just leads to more abortion. Any country that accepts abortion is not teaching the people to love, but to use any violence to get what they want. Many people are very, very concerned about the children in India, in Africa, where many are hurting from hunger. Many people are concerned about the violence in this great United States. These are very good concerns. But often the same people are not concerned with the millions who are being killed by the deliberate decision of their own mothers. The child is God's gift to the family. Each child is created in the special image and likeness of God for greater things, to love and to be loved. God says, even if a mother can forget her child, I will not forget you. I have carved you into the palm of my hand. We are carved into the palm of his hand. The unborn child is carved into the palm of his hand from conception and is called by God to love and to be loved, not only now in this life, but forever. God can never forget us. I will tell you something beautiful. We are fighting abortion by adoption, by care of the mother and adoption for her baby. We have saved thousands of lives. We have sent word to the clinics, to the hospitals, to the police stations. Do not kill this child. We will save this child. We cannot solve all the problems in the world, but never bring in the worst problem of all, and that is to destroy love. We must bring the presence of God into your family. Love begins at home, and it is not how much we do, but how much love we put into what we do. I want you to find the poor here. I want you to find them right in your own home first, and begin to love there. Bear the good news to your own people first, and find out about your next door neighbors. Do you even know who they are? I had the most extraordinary experience of love of a neighbor from a Hindu family. A gentleman came to me and said, Mother Teresa, this family has not eaten for so long. Do something. So I took rice and I went there immediately. And the children, their eyes shining with hunger. And the mother took the rice and went out. When she came back, I asked her, what did you do? Why did you do this? She gave me a very simple answer. They are hungry also. And she knew. And who are they? They were a Muslim family. and she knew. I didn't bring any rice that evening because I wanted them, Hindus and Muslims, to enjoy the joy of sharing. But there were the children, radiating joy, sharing in the joy and peace with their mother because she gave until it hurts. And you see that this is where love begins, at home in the family. We can keep the joy of loving Jesus in our hearts and spread it to all we do connect with. Let us make that one point, that no child will go unwanted, unloved, uncared for, killed, and thrown away, and to give until it hurts with a smile.
It's a bit chilly here in Britain today. It could be because it's January 19th, 1976, but it could also be that we have just left what may have been the coldest year of the Cold War thus far. 1975 has been a year of dissension, crisis, and passive resignation for Great Britain. The communist threat has been creeping toward their doorstep for the last 30 years. So, therefore, they can no longer ignore it. The Soviet Union has sent troops to the battleground in Angola to aid the communist rebels there. This has transformed an already terrible civil war into a global arena in which all three of the major powers of the world, the Soviet Union, the United States, and now Great Britain, are vying for the future of communism in this emerging African nation. Our speaker today began her political career as president of the Oxford University Conservative Association while a student there. She joined the local Conservative Association in Essex and was eventually chosen as a candidate for the safe Labour seat of Dartford in the 1951 general elections. The youngest and only female candidate, she became a member of Parliament in 1959 after a challenging election. She was elected Education Secretary and Cabinet Minister under Edward Heath in 1970. In February of last year, she became leader of the opposition, defeating Heath in the general election. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Margaret Thatcher. Margaret Thatcher has come to take a definitive stance on the Soviet Union's actions, and more importantly, to declare what path Britain ought to take at this political crossroads. Fear of socialism has oppressed the British people and the globe, and now the security of their country lies in the hands of her chosen leaders, leaders who must act and act quickly. Britain must work to preserve her values, or she will fall to the Soviet threat. It is crucial for our leaders to stand firm and be willing to face the facts rather than hide from them. They must protect this nation from foreign threats. Therefore, I urge you to listen to Mrs. Thatcher's charge and to act accordingly. Ladies and gentlemen, Mrs. Margaret Thatcher.
The first duty of any government is to safeguard its people against external oppression, to guarantee the survival of our way of life. The question we must now ask ourselves is as if the present government is fulfilling that duty. It is dismantling our defenses in this time of strategic threat to Britain and her allies from expansionist power that is graver than it of any since the end of the last war. Military men are always warning us that the strategic balance is tilting against NATO and the West, but the Soviets never listen. They not seem to realize that the submarines and missiles that the Russians are building could be destined to be used against us. Perhaps some of the people in the Labour Party think that we are on the same side as the Russians, but let us just look at what Russia is doing. She's ruled by a dictatorship of strong, self-reliant, determined men who are rapidly making their country the foremost naval and military force in the world. They are not doing this solely for the sake of self-defense. A large, landlocked country like Russia does not need to build the most powerful navy in the world just for its own frontiers. No, the Russians are bent on world dominance, and they are rapidly acquiring the means to become the most powerful imperial nation we have seen. The men in the Soviet Politburo do not have to worry about the ebb and the flow of public opinion. They put guns before butter, while we put about everything else before guns. They know that they have one sense of power, the military sense. But let us make no mistake. The Russians calculate that their military strength will more than make up for their economic and social depressions. They are determined to use it in order to get what they want from us. I would be the first to welcome anything the Russians are ready to give of a genuine détente. But I am afraid that the evidence points the other way. I warned before Helsinki of the dangers of falling for the illusory détente. Some people were skeptical at the time, but now we see that my warning was fully justified. Has détente reduced the Russians to cut back on their defense program? Has it dissuaded them from brazen intervention in Angola? Has it led to any improvement of the conditions of Soviet citizens or the subject populations of the Eastern Europe? We know the answers. At Helsinki, we endorsed the status quo of Eastern Europe. In return, we had hoped for freer movement of people and policies all across the Iron Curtain. So far, we have got nothing of substance. We are devoted, as we always have been, on the maintenance of peace. We will welcome any initiative from the Soviet Union that would contribute to that goal. But we also must heed the warnings of those like Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who reminded us that we have been fighting a kind of third world war over the entire period since 1945, that we have been steadily losing ground. As we look back over the battles of the past year, over the list of countries that we have lost to imperialized Soviet efforts, can we deny that Solzhenitsyn is right? We have seen Vietnam and all of Indochina be swallowed up by communist aggression. We have seen the communists make an open grab for power in Portugal, our oldest ally, a sign that many of the battles in the Third World War are being fought inside the Western countries. And now the Soviet and its satellites are bringing in arms, men, and money in an effort to hope to drag the people of Angola into the communist bloc. We must remember that there are no Queensberry rules in the contest that is now going on, and the Russians are playing to win. The advance of communist power threatens our whole way of life. That advance is not irreversible, providing that we take the necessary measures now. But the longer we go on running down our means of survival, the harder it will be to catch up. In other words, the longer Labour remains in government, the more vulnerable this country will be. What has this government been doing for our defences? Under the last defence review, the government said it would cut defence spending over the next 9 years. If there are any further cuts, perhaps the Defence Secretary should change his title, for the sake of accuracy, to the Secretary of Insecurity. But let us be clear about one thing. This is not a moment when anyone with the interests of this country at heart should be talking about cutting our defenses. It is a time when we urgently need to strengthen our defenses. Of course, it places a burden on us, but it is one that we must be willing to bear if we want our freedom to survive. Throughout our history, we have carried the torch for freedom. Now, as I travel the world, I find people asking again and again, what has happened to Britain? They want to know why we are keeping our heads under the sand, why with all of our experience, we are not giving a lead. There are crises farther from home than they could deeply affect us. Angola is the most immediate. There are several important reasons. The first is that Angola occupies a vital strategic position. If the pro-Soviet faction wins, one of the immediate consequences will almost certainly be the setting up of Soviet air and naval bases across the South Atlantic. The second reason is even more far-reaching. If the Russians have their way in Angola, they may well conclude that they can repeat the performance elsewhere. Similarly, uncommitted nations would be left to conclude that NATO is a spent force and their best policy is making accommodations with Russia. They seem to believe that their intervention is consistent with détente. What Russians are doing in Angola is against détente, and we should make it plain to the Russians that we do not believe what they are doing in Angola is consistent with détente. We stand with that select body of nations in democracy and social and economic freedom. But our role reaches far beyond this. We have an abundant experience and expertise in this country and the fields of diplomacy on all broad accounts. We have a difficult year ahead in 1976. I hope it will not result in the further decline of Western power and influence that the kind did in 1975. It is clear that internal violence, and above all, political terrorism, will continue to pose a major threat to all Western societies, and that it may be exploited as an instrument by communism. We should seek close coordination between the police and the social securities of the community and of NATO in the battle against terrorism. The way that our own police have coped with the recent terrorist incidents provides a splendid model for other forces. Caught up in the problems and hardships that socialism has brought to Britain, we are sometimes in danger of failing to see the vast transformations that are taking place in the world, that they dwarf our own issues, even though those are also important. But we also have to wake up to these developments and find a political voice that will respond to them. The Soviet military power will not disappear just because we refuse to look at it. And we must assume that that is there for a reason, whether by force or as threat, unless we maintain the necessary deterrence. In the meantime, the Conservative Party has the vital task of shaking the British public up from their long sleep. The Conservative Party must now sound a warning. There are moments in our history where we have to make a fundamental choice. This is one such moment, a moment when our choice will determine the life or the death of our kind of society and the future of our children. Let's ensure that our children have cause to rejoice that we have not forsaken their freedom. Thank you.
French citizens and members of the international community, I am Renée Sasson, and it is my pleasure to introduce to you a champion of human dignity. As one of the 9 drafters and chairman committee for the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, I have worked closely with Mrs. Eleanor Roosevelt for the last year and a half. Though commonly identified as First Lady of the United States, a more apropos title would be First Lady of the World. She embodies ideals that transcend jurisdictional boundaries. In fact, it was in this very country where she was first inspired to pursue the flourishing of humankind. A headmaster by the name of Marie Souvestre took adolescent Eleanor as her traveling companion through France. For perhaps the first time, she witnessed the struggles of the working class, wherein she diagnosed man's most basic and sacred rights: liberty, security, prosperity, property, and resistance to oppression. While President Franklin D. Roosevelt worked on and legislated economic reform, First Lady Eleanor was at his right hand, working at the helm of activism for those in the United States whose fundamental rights were being denied. After the Great Depression in the 1930s, Eleanor used her position as a platform to place the injustices against marginal groups in the forefront of the public eye. She focused on equality for women, blacks, and the working class, and her activism has revolutionized the traditional role of the First Lady. Within the Democratic Party, she campaigned for women's suffrage and equality within the workhouse. She joined anti-lynching campaigns and petitioned for the housing of the minorities. She scrutinized working conditions and protected workers' rights to organize. As our nations recover from the Second World War, on this day, the 28th of September, 1948, find comfort in Mrs. Roosevelt. May she serve as a reminder to us all that all humans are born with an inherent integrity and dignity. Let our law confer mercy to the impoverished, the oppressed, and the suffering. Ladies and gentlemen, the crusader for mercy herself, Mrs. Eleanor Roosevelt.
I have come this evening to talk with you about one of the greatest issues of our time. That is the preservation of human freedom. I have chosen to discuss this in France at the Sorbonne because it is here in this soil the roots of human freedom have long ago struck deep, and here they have been richly nourished. It was here the Declaration of the Rights of Man were proclaimed, and the great slogans of the French Revolution, liberté, equalité, fraternité, fired the imagination of men. I have chosen to discuss this issue in Europe because this has been the scene of the greatest historic battles between freedom and tyranny. The Human Rights Commission was given as its first and most important task the preparation of an international Bill of Rights. The General Assembly, which opened its third session here in Paris just a few days ago, will have before it the first fruit of the Commission's labors in this task. That is the International Declaration of Human Rights. It was decided by our Commission that a bill should contain two parts. One, a declaration which could be approved through action of the member states of the United Nations and General Assembly. This declaration would have great moral force and would say to the peoples of the world, this is what we hope human rights may mean to all people in the years to come. We have put down here the rights that we consider basic for individual human beings the world over to have. Without them, we feel that the full development of individual personality is impossible. The second part of the bill, which the Human Rights Commission has yet to complete because of lack of time, is a covenant which would be in the form of a treaty to be presented to the nations of the world. Each nation, as it is prepared to do so, would ratify this covenant, and the covenant would then become binding on the nations which adhere to it. Each nation ratifying would then be obligated to change its laws wherever they did not conform to the points contained in the covenant. The declaration has come from the Human Rights Commission with unanimous acceptance, except for 4 abstentions: the USSR, Yugoslavia, Ukraine, and Belarus. The reason for this is a fundamental difference in the conception of human rights as they exist in these states and in certain other member states of the United Nations. In the discussion before the Assembly, I think it should be made crystal clear what these differences are, and tonight I want to spend a little time making them clear to you. We must not be confused about what freedom is. Basic human rights are simple and easily understood. Freedom of speech and free press, freedom of religion and of worship, freedom of assembly and the right to petition, the right of men to be secure in their homes, free from unreasonable search and seizure, and from arbitrary arrest and punishment. We must not be deluded by the efforts of the forces of reaction to prostitute the great words of our free tradition, and thereby to confuse the struggle. Democracy, freedom, and human rights have come to have a definite meaning to the people of the world, which we must not allow any nation to so change that they are made synonymous with suppression and dictatorship. There are basic differences that show up, even in the use of words, between a democratic and a totalitarian country. I think the best example one can give of this basic difference is the use of terms in the right to work. The Soviet Union insists that this is a basic right which it alone can guarantee because it alone provides full employment by the government. But the right to work in the Soviet Union means the assignment of workers to do whatever task is given to them by the government without an opportunity for the people to participate in the decision that the government should do this. A society in which everyone works is not necessarily a free society and may indeed be a slave society. On the other hand, a society in which there is widespread economic insecurity can turn freedom into a barren and vapid wasteland for millions. We in the United States have come to realize it means freedom to choose one's job, to work, or not work as one desires. We in the United States have come to realize, however, that people as individuals that cannot find work of the kind they are accustomed to doing, and this is a decision brought about by public opinion, which came as a result of the Great Depression in which many people were out of work. But we would not consider in the United States that we have gained any freedom if we were compelled to follow a dictatorial assignment to work, where and when we were told. The right of choice would seem to us an important, fundamental freedom. Sometimes the processes of democracy are slow, and I have known some of our leaders to say that a benevolent dictatorship would accomplish the ends desired in a shorter time than it takes to go through the democratic processes of discussion and the slow formation of public opinion. But there is no way of ensuring that a dictatorship will remain benevolent or that power, once in the hands of few, will be returned to the people without struggle or revolution. This we have learned by experience. And we accept the slow processes of democracy because we know that shortcuts compromise principles on which no compromise is possible. It is my belief, and I'm sure it is yours also, that the struggle for democracy and freedom is a critical struggle, for their preservation is essential to the great objective of the United Nations to maintain international peace and security. Among free men, the end cannot justify the means. We know the patterns of totalitarianism, the single political party, the control of schools, press, radio, the arts, the sciences, the church, to support autocratic authority. These are the age-old patterns against which men have struggled for 3,000 years. These are the signs of reaction, retreat, and retrogression. The field of human rights is not one on which compromise of fundamental principles is possible. The work of the Commission on Human Rights is illustrative. The Declaration of Human Rights provides, everyone has the right to leave any country, including his own. The Soviet representative said he would agree to this right if a single phrase was added to it, in accordance with the procedure laid down by the laws in that country. It is obvious that to accept this would not only compromise, but nullify the right stated. This case forcefully illustrates the importance of the proposition that we must ever be alert to compromising fundamental human rights merely for the sake of unanimity, and thus lose them. The future must see the broadening of human rights throughout the world. People who have glimpsed freedom will never be content until they have secured it for themselves. In a true sense, human rights are a fundamental object of law and government in a just society. Human rights exist to the degree that they are respected by people in relations with each other and by governments in relations with their citizens. The place to discuss the issue of human rights is the United Nations. The United Nations has been set up as the common meeting ground for nations where we can consider together our mutual problems and take advantage of our differences in experience. It is inherent in our firm attachment to democracy and freedom that we stand always ready to use fundamental democratic procedures of honest discussion and negotiation. It is now, as always, our hope that despite the wide differences in approach we face in the world today, we can, with mutual good faith in the principles of the United Nations Charter, arrive at a common basis of understanding. We are here to join the meetings of this great international assembly in your beautiful capital city of Paris. Freedom for the individual is an inseparable part of the cherished traditions of France. As one of the delegates from the United States, I pray, Almighty God, that we can win another victory here for the rights and freedoms of all men. Thank you.
I can go. Oh, okay. Here at the Republican National Convention of 1992, it is our duty to be a voice for those our government influences. Today we have a young mother, a cherished daughter, who will be speaking on behalf of others and herself who are afflicted with acquired immune deficiency syndrome, otherwise known as AIDS. Mary Fisher was born in Kentucky and raised in conservative Republican circles by her father, who we all know as Max Fisher. To this day, Miss Fisher is mentored by former President and First Lady Gerald and Betty Ford. But she speaks to us today because 2 years ago, Mary's husband asked for a divorce. And 1 year later, he told her he was HIV positive. After many tests, she found out that she was HIV positive as well. But thankfully, her kids tested negative to this disease. Before Mary's diagnosis, she established herself as an artist and an author. But now she adds activist to that list. She speaks for those who cannot. She is a voice for victims of a sickness without a cure. As she speaks today, I hope her words provoke compassionate thoughts. And I hope that those thoughts will lead you to action. Please join me in welcoming the esteemed Miss Mary Fisher to the stage.
Thank you. Less than 3 months ago at platform hearings in Salt Lake City, I asked the Republican Party to lift the shroud of silence that has been draped over the issue of HIV and AIDS. I have come tonight to bring that silence to an end. I bear a message of challenge, not self-congratulation. I want your attention, not your applause. I would never have asked to be HIV positive, but I believe that in all things there is a purpose, and I stand before you and before the nation gladly. The reality of AIDS is brutally clear. 200,000 Americans are dead or dying. 1 million more are infected. Worldwide, 40 million, 60 million, or 100 million infections will be counted in the coming few years. But despite science and research, White House meetings and congressional hearings, despite good intentions and bold initiatives, campaign slogans and hopeful promises, it is, despite it all, the epidemic which is winning tonight. In the context of an election year, I ask you, here in this great hall, or listening in the quiet of your home, to recognize that the AIDS virus is not a political creature. It does not care whether you are Democrat or Republican. It does not ask whether you are black or white, male or female, gay or straight, young or old. Tonight, I represent an AIDS community whose members have been reluctantly drafted from every segment of American society. Though I am white and a mother, I am one with the black infant struggling with tubes in the Philadelphia hospital. Though I am female and contracted this disease in marriage and enjoy the warm support of my family, I am one with the lonely gay man sheltering a flickering candle from the cold wind of his family's rejection. This is not a distant threat. It is a present danger. The rate of infection is increasing fastest among women and children. Largely unknown a decade ago, AIDS is the third leading killer of young adult Americans today. But it won't be third for long because unlike other diseases, this one travels. Adolescents don't give each other cancer or heart disease because they believe they are in love. But HIV is different, and we have helped it along. We have killed each other with our ignorance, our prejudice, and our silence. We may take refuge in our stereotypes, but we cannot hide there long because HIV asks only one thing of those it attacks. Are you human? And this is the right question. Are you human? Because people with HIV have not entered into some alien state of being. They are human, and they have not earned cruelty, and they do not deserve meanness. They don't benefit from being isolated or treated as outcasts. Each of them is exactly what God made, a person, not evil, deserving of our judgment, not victims longing for our pity. People, ready for support and worthy of compassion. My call to you, my party, is to take a public stand. We must be consistent if we are to be believed. We cannot love justice and ignore prejudice, love our children and fear to teach them. Whatever our role as parent or policymaker, we must act as eloquently as we speak, else we have no integrity. My call to the nation is a plea for awareness. If you believe you are safe, you are in danger, because I was not hemophiliac. I was not at risk. Because I was not gay. I was not at risk. Because I did not inject drugs. I was not at risk. My father has devoted much of his lifetime guarding against another Holocaust. He is part of the generation who heard Pastor Niemöller come out of the Nazi death camps to say, "They came after the Jews, and I was not a Jew, so I did not protest. They came after the trade unionists, and I was not a trade unionist, so I did not protest. Then they came after the Roman Catholics, and I was not a Roman Catholic, so I did not protest. Then they came after me, and there was no one left to protest." The lesson history teaches is this: if you believe you are safe, you are at risk. If you do not see this killer stalking your children, look again. There is no family or community, no race or religion, no place left in America that is safe until we genuinely embrace this message. We are a nation at risk. Tonight, HIV marches resolutely towards AIDS in more than 1 million American homes, littering its pathway with the bodies of the young, young men, young women, young parents, young children, and one of the families is mine. If it is true that HIV inevitably turns to AIDS, then it is true that my children will inevitably become orphans. My family has been a rock of support. My 84-year-old father, who has pursued the healing of the nations, will not accept the premise that he cannot heal his daughter. My mother will not be broken. She still calls at midnight to tell wonderful jokes that make me laugh. Sisters and friends, and my brother Philip, whose birthday is today, all have helped carry me over the hardest places. I am blessed, richly and deeply blessed, to have such a family. But not all of you have been so blessed. You are HIV positive, but dare not say it. You have lost loved ones, but you dare not whisper the word AIDS. You weep silently. You grieve alone. And I have a message for you. It is not you who should feel shame. It is we. We who tolerate ignorance and practice prejudice. We who have taught you to fear. We must lift our shroud of silence, making it safe for you to reach out for compassion. It is our task to seek safety for our children, not in quiet denial, but in effective action. Someday, our children will be grown. My son, Max, now 4, will take the measure of his mother. My son, Zachary, now 2, will sort through his memories. I may not be here to hear their judgments, but I know already what I hope that they are. I want my children to know that their mother was not a victim. She was a messenger. I do not want them to think, as I once did, that courage is the absence of fear. I want them to know that courage is the strength to act wisely when we are most afraid. I want them to have the courage to step forward when called by their nation or their party and give leadership no matter what the personal cost. And I ask no more of you than I ask of myself or my children. To the millions of you who are grieving, who are frightened, who are suffering, have courage, and you will find support. And to the millions who are strong, I issue the plea: set aside prejudice and politics to make room for compassion and sound policy. To my children, I make this pledge: I will not give in, Zachary, because I draw my courage from you. Your silly giggle gives me hope. Your gentle prayers give me strength. And you, my child, give me the reason to say to America, you are at risk. And I will not rest, Max, until I have done all I can to make your world safe. I will seek a place where intimacy is not the prelude to suffering. I will not hurry to leave you, my children, but when I go, I pray that you will not suffer any shame on my account. To all within the sound of my voice, I appeal. Learn with me the lessons of history and of grace, so my children will not be afraid to say the word AIDS when I am gone. Then their children and yours may not need to whisper it at all. God bless the children, and God bless us all. Good night.
Okay, thanks to everyone who gave great speeches. Our next event is Random Theme. We're gonna start here at 6:30, where we'll announce like who's doing what and pairings and all that stuff. So see you then.